Shalom Aleichem, and welcome everyone as we, Baruch Hashem, have the privilege once again to prepare for Shabbat Kodesh, Shabbat Parshat Terumah, the first Shabbat in Chodesh Adar Aleph. Let's take a look at some of the lessons that we can learn from this week's Parashat. The Parashat starts off, Hashem speaks to Moshe to say, Daber b'nei Yisrael v'ikhu li terumah, and take for me a portion, take a terumah for me. Rashi explains, what does it mean? V'ikhu li terumah, li lishmi. It should be given, that when it's given lishma, it's given just for the sake of Hashem. What does this mean, to give just for the sake of Hashem? In Sefer Devarim, it tells us, you shall surely give to the poor person. And then it says, and let your heart not feel bad when you give him. Simple understanding this pasuk is, don't feel bad that you're parting with your money and giving it to someone else. However, Rabbanim Mepeshischa says, there's a different interpretation. It means that when you give tzedakah, when you give someone tzedakah, it has to be given lishma for Hashem, because Hashem said to give it, and not because you feel bad for that person. As the story goes with Rabbanim himself, that he came to a place and there was a very, very poor person there, and he saw how terrible the guy was living in, the condition, and so he gave him right away all the money that he had. A little while later, the Rebbe came back and gave more tzedakah to this man. So his Hasidim saw him and said, what are you doing, Rebbe? You already gave him so much money. Why'd you come back to give him more? And the Rebbe said, when I first gave him the money, I saw that he was hungry. I saw the look on his children's face. I saw the look on the whole family. And my heart pained from them. And I gave them because I felt bad for them. But that's not the reason why I'm supposed to give tzedakah. I'm supposed to give it tzedakah because Hashem said to give tzedakah. So in that case, I have to come again. And this time, now that I don't feel bad because I already gave them, I went ahead and gave them again. It's good to feel sympathy for someone else, especially for the poor, and to give them. But more so to understand that the mitzvah is because Hashem said to give. And therefore, no matter what happens when you give it, you gave it lishma, you gave it completely for Hashem. The Satmar Rebbe, Rav Yoel, he explained that the Torah teaches us that when a worker is working in another person's vineyard, someone's working in a person's vineyard, he's allowed to take of the grapes and eat from them while he's actually harvesting the grapes. And Rashi explains that it's only when the worker is cutting down the vines and placing the grapes into the owner's vessels that he's permitted to eat from the grapes. Placing the grapes into the owner's vessels allow the worker to access the grapes. So when the worker is working for his master, and whoever it is, the boss, and he's working and putting it for him, he's allowed to take the grapes as well. The Satmar Rebbe explains, when a person gives tzedakah, when he's helping a poor person, he's supporting a Torah scholar, he is filling up Hashem's vessels. Hashem left these vessels empty, and He wants people to fill them up. So now that you're beginning to fill them up, you're also allowed to use from those vessels. And that's what it means that we have. It says, Asir b'shvil shetishasher, a person should give the tithe. The person should give 10%. This way he'll become rich, because when you're giving and you're filling up those vessels, now you also have permission to use from those vessels, and that's how Hashem helps back a person who pays, a person who gives. The famous story with Rabbi Yoel, at the Satmar Rebbe, he was known very well for his generosity, and every penny that reached his desk during the course of the day went out to poor people who came by. And the story goes that once a man came to him for financial assistance, and he told the Rebbe that he has so many problems, so many pains. He related how his wife had died, and he has a bunch of orphans at home that he has to single-handedly feed, and that his leg was amputated due to a serious illness, And between his ill health and his many responsibilities, he found it very difficult to hold a job. And he looked at the Rebbe pleadingly and stretched out his hand, asking the Rebbe to help him out. And the Rebbe did not let him down, giving him everything that he had collected during that course of that day, which was a huge amount of money, and he gave it to this poor fellow. Not a moment after that this man left, the Gabbai runs into the room and says to the Rebbe, I'm so upset. The Rebbe says, what's wrong? He says, Rebbe, that poor person that claimed to be poor and claimed to be an amputee, I just saw him. As soon as he left the house, he had all of a sudden 2 legs. He must have hid it some way to make you think he was amputee, but he really has both legs. And you gave him so much money. The Rebbe heard this. He stormed from his chair. He went to look outside the window, and lo and behold, he saw the man with two legs. And he said, wow, Baruch Hashem, this man has both legs. A few minutes later, the Gabbai gets the Rebbe, you won't believe it. I just saw him. His wife was in the car, and they just went into the store shopping. And again, the Rebbe's second reaction paralleled his first. And he was full excitement that this man had not lost his wife. This is understanding when you're giving tzedakah. It's not because you're giving because a person is poor, a person is this, a person is that. Yeah, you need to feel sympathy in order to give. But at the end of the day, you're giving because Hashem said to give. And if what you see and hear, and you give it, even if Chas Shalom, it doesn't go into the right hands, but since you gave it Lishma, Hashem will pay you back many times, many, many more times. It says here, Lishmi, you have to give it for my name. And on Sunday during our halacha class, we got into this idea. The Ben Ish Chai brings it down, the Shlo brings it down. The idea is that Lishmi actually means for Hashem's name. That means that the pruta, the coin that a person is giving to tzedakah, represents the Yud of Hashem's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. And then the person's hand, which has 5 fingers, represents the Hey of Yud Kei Vav Kei. The arm that he uses to give the tzedakah is the Vav, and the Ani's hand, or the Gabbai's hand, the Gabbai tzedakah who takes it, is also the Hey, and it completes the Yud Kei Vav Kei. It's brought down in the Ben Ish Chai, brought down in the Shlo, in the Chavis Yair, that this is what it means to give it Lishmi. And we spoke about on Sunday as well how it's very important to stand up when you're giving tzedakah. And the Chavis Yair says if the ani comes and stretches out his hand first, instead of you taking the coin with your hand, then you're going to, Hashem's name is going to be misspelled. And it's not going to be considered giving it Lishmi and giving it to Hashem for Hashem's name. And so he says here that it's important that when the ani is coming, when the poor person is coming to collect tzedakah, you don't wait for him to come to you. As soon as you see him, you should take the coin and you should walk over to the anis and make sure this way it will be Yud Kei Vav Kei. They say a story with the Rav Meir in Parshat, one of the early Hasidic masters. He was quote unquote office, whatever way you want to call his office, his place that he was learning his study. And a poor widow came, and she demanded to see the Rebbe right away. And the Gaboyim were saying, no, you can't skip the line. Eventually, the Rebbe himself said, let her in. And the Rebbe, she came in, and she said how much, troubles is she in, and she needs money, and she needs help. And the Rebbe took a coin that was worth a lot of money, took it from his table. He held it for a moment and transferred it from one hand to the other. And afterwards, he placed the coin on the table and motioned for the woman to take it. And he told Hasidim afterwards, don't think I was playing games one hand to the other hand. He said, I was going to make Lishmi. I was giving tzedakah for Hashem's name. Now, I don't want to put it in the woman's hand directly. So I took my hand with the pruta, the yud and the hey, stretched my arm out and gave it to my other hand, accepting it for her, and then put it down on the table. It gives us somewhat of an idea of what it means to give tzedakah. not because we feel bad, and not to feel bad if it went to the wrong place. But if you gave tzedakah with a full heart, if you gave tzedakah with a full heart, then you understand what it means to give lishmi, to get up and to give it, and what an opportunity a person has to give tzedakah. It's really, like we said many, many times, it's Hashem giving him the chance for him to receive chesed. When you go and give tzedakah, it's Hashem actually giving you and saying, listen, you need some chesed in your life. Let's see if you're going to go ahead and give it to someone else for you to get it back. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we now understand this, take it and apply it to our lives, that giving tzedakah is giving it in Hashem's name, with the Yud Kei Vav Kei, in the proper order. Don't wait for the money to come to you, but rather you go to the poor person or to the Gabbai Tzedakah, to any organization that's giving. Don't wait for them to call you 500 times. You be the one to go and give it, and this way establish it that you're giving. V'kuli Terumah li lishmi. Let's move on to another lesson on this week's Parshat. In this week's Parshat, we learn about the construction of the Mishkan and the vessels inside, the Kelim. We have two Kelim that some of them in the Kelim. Two of the Kelim that we have is an Aron, the Ark, which had the Luchot, as well as the Shulchan, which was the table. The Aron represents Torah, obviously, and the Shulchan represents Parnasa, represents sustenance, Mizanot. Rav Pam shares in the name of his father, Rav Meir Pam, who heard it from the Hafetz Chaim, a very nice, interesting pshat in the parasha. It says, when it talks about the Aron HaKodesh, it says, V'asu Aron atzei shitim, amatayim v'chetzi, orko, v'ama v'chetzi rochbo, v'ama v'chetzi komato. Every dimension that he gives, 2.5 by 1.5 by 1.5. Every dimension of the Aron is given in half measurements. Whereas, when you come to the Shulchan, it says, when you make the Shulchan, its length and its width, 2 by 1. But 1.5 is its height. So the Hafetz Chaim shared over, because you have to pay attention to these measurements, and not just random measurements. The Hafetz Chaim explained the Aron, which represents Torah, is all in halves. Why is it all in halves? Because no one can ever say, I have complete understanding of the Torah. It's impossible. There's no shleimut, there's no completion to learning Torah. There's always something more you can learn. There's always something else that you didn't know, something more that you can delve into, or so many different shatim and so many different levels to learn Torah. A person can never say. Rav Pam would say, that's one of the reasons why the Gemara starts on Daf Bet, to tell you don't even know Daf Aleph. And you don't know Daf Aleph, you definitely don't know any Daf. That's what it means. The person goes in to learn Torah, he understands that he doesn't know, and he's able to learn more. There was a story that Rav Pam would share over, that there was a certain town and they hired a new Rav, and they made a huge Seudah. They hired a new Rav. It's a famous Rav, and everyone was excited to see him, to have him. And in the area, there lived one of the bums. A guy didn't work, guy didn't do anything, a problem maker. He never shows up to shul except for Yom Kippur. And when they made the Seudah for the new Rav, all of a sudden this guy showed up. He comes in, he looks at the rabbi at the table, he chuckles, he laughs, ha ha ha, and he storms out of the shul. People didn't know what was going on, so some people walked after him and said, why'd you come in? Why'd you leave? Why'd you laugh? What happened? He said, you see that rabbi and that Rav? You should know, me and him were in the same cheder. We went to the same school. At first they started to teach us Aleph Bet, then the Siddur, then they said Mishnah, then they said Chumash, then they said Mishnah, then they said Gemara. At that point I turned to him and I said, you see, this thing is never going to end. I'm getting out right now. And he said, now I hear this guy's a huge rabbi. So I said, he must have finished everything already. So I came today to see if he finished or not. I walked in for 1 second and I saw his eyes buried in a sefer. That means he didn't finish learning, and I was right to get out. That's the way the unlearned people think. But we understand what it means, that everything is in half measurements, because there's no end, there's no completion to learning Torah. The person has to continue to delve into Torah. Right? The Pri Megadim How many times he writes, and not only but many of the Farshim explain, many of the Torah scholars write, in my lack of understanding, I'm but a beast without understanding. That's the way they understood that whatever they know is such a low level. Now, what about the Shulchan? The Shulchan, the length and the width is full measurements, whereas the height was in a half a measurement. So the Havetz Chaim would explain, saying that when it comes to Parnasah, the person has to say, I got enough. I have what I need. I have what I need. And the person should feel that Hashem has provided him with everything he needs, that Parnasah is in full measurements. This is the meaning of the bracha that we say every morning. Sha'asa li kol tzorki. Hashem has provided me with everything that I need. That's the way a person has to live. Right? So he's happy with his physical things that Hashem gave him. Once someone saw a very poor person saying the bracha of Sha'asa li kol tzorki with a lot of simcha, a lot of happiness, a lot of kavanah. So he said to him, I don't understand. You have nothing. What are you so excited about? He said, it must be that Hashem decided that I should be poor. And to be poor, I have plenty of. And so I'm very happy that Hashem gave me my full measurement of what I need. All right, the famous story of Rav Zusha. Two people came and they asked the Maggid of Mizrich. He said, how can you thank Hashem for the bad as there's good? For the bad as just as you thank Hashem for the good. So the Maggid of Mizrich said, you have to go to Rav Zusha. And Rav Zusha was the poorest person, a lot of trouble, a lot of problems, and apparently he was in the base medrash, it was freezing cold, and finally these two Hasidim got in, and they saw Rav Zusha, no heat, everything, he's shivering away there, and they asked him, they said the Maggid Mizrich send us to ask you how a person is supposed to thank Hashem for the bad as for the good. And Rav Zusha said, I'm very sorry, I don't know why the Maggid Mizrich sent you to me, because Hashem has never done anything bad for me. It's a different way of thinking. Even though he had trouble in some time, he was happy with what he has. Right? Once the Havetz Chaim overheard two people talking. He said, how's your Parnasah going? And the person said, it could be better. The Havetz Chaim said, really? How do you know that if you had more money, it would be a good thing for you? Perhaps it can ruin you. Right? The famous story, they say there was once a group of boys playing a game. It was called If I Was God, right? And there was one of the boys there were going to grow up to be the future Gadol. And they got to everyone's turn. Everyone said, I would make no poor people. I would give out money, universal income. I would give out universal health care. Everyone had an idea of what they would do if they were God. And this person, this young boy, he said, if I was Hashem, I wouldn't touch it. I wouldn't do anything. Obviously, if Hashem put the world the way it is, as Hashem put it, it's perfect. As humans, we have a job to help out and do stuff in the world. But as for Hashem, everything that He does is 100% perfect. And this is why the measurement of the length and the width are incomplete measurements. Now, what about the height of the Shulchan? What about the height of the Shulchan? So, the height of the Shulchan represents what a person can do with his table. The height is the height to heaven, right? You're going high to Shemaim. When a person uses his table in the correct way, he does avodah avadati, a divine service to Hashem with his table. This is the table that's in front of Hashem. With the person's table, today we can do what they did on the Mizbeach. We have kaparat via the table. If a person uses his right. If a person has shalom and Shabbat, he comes home and he's lashon hara, or there's fights on the table and other stuff. There's no kedusha on that table. But if a person has zemirot, divei Torah, family getting along, everyone playing nicely, everyone being nicely, everything they ate there, it's the shem mitzvah. It's considered 1.5. It's a half amot because there's no limit of how high you can go with your table if you're using the table lishma, if you're using it for Hashem. And this is what it is. This is what it means. This is why the Shulchan's height was in half amot. A person has that ability. How many people we know came back to Judaism just based on a Shabbat meal? The correct Shabbat meal in the right environment with the right feelings can make a huge, huge difference. One last lesson on this week's Parshat. we have in this week's parasha, it says later on that when they're making the Mishkan, va'asita et ha'kerashim leMishkan, atzei shitim omdim. They shall make the beams of the Mishkan from shitim wood. Then they should stand erect. Now, it says ha-kerashim. It doesn't say kerashim. The beams. What it means, this beams? What specific beams are these? So Rashi tells us that Yaakov Avinu planted these trees in Mitzrayim before he was dying. Before he died, he planted it. He said, and he told the Bnei Yisrael that when you leave, you take this with you. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to ask you to build a Mishkan, and you're going to need it. So this is the Ha-Kirashim, these beams, these trees, I'd say Shitim. Now, what's very interesting, I saw from Eliyahu Meir Bloch, like Tzaddik L'Bracha, Shiva tells, he says, imagine this. Yaakov knows they're going to be living in the desert for 40 years, right? He knows they're going to be there. And the only thing he prepares for them is beams. That's going to be used for a Mishkan, for a spiritual thing. He didn't prepare for them food. He didn't prepare for them anything else. He prepared for them beams so they can build a Mishkan. He says from here, he learns a very important lesson. The only thing that you have to be worried about is about spiritual needs, not your physical needs. What you need to be working in life and preparing for is spiritual needs. But your physical needs, that you just need to trust in Hashem that He'll provide you. And He'll give you man, and He'll give you stuff like that. But the Mishkan, Hashem's going to build it for me in the Midbar. No, that you got to get ready for. That you got to prepare for. That's an amazing understanding in its own. But Rabbi Shalom Shadron, he said, but the Mishkan needed more things than just the beams. You needed the Avnei Shoham, the Avnei Miluim, and we know the Avnei Shoham and Miluim came in a miracle, came on the clouds, didn't see him. So, why were the beams something that they needed physically to bring with them, whereas other parts of the Mishkan came miraculously to them? So he explains as follows. He says the Mishkan, each keli is very special. Everything has a lot of specialty to it, a lot of kedusha, it's kapara for other things. But he says the whole thing, the whole Mishkan, in order to have a Mishkan, you have to have a defined wall, right? And that's where the Shekhinah is going to rest. Now, the Shekhinah is in the whole world. But in order for us to bring the Shekhinah into a place, we have to make a physical place for it and put up beams. And he says, in order to have Hashrat HaShekhinah, the resting Hashem Shekhinah, you have to physically do it. It doesn't come through miracles. And that's why Dafka Yaakov put that, because you can have miracles and everything else, but to have Hashem Shekhinah, you have to physically do something about that. And that's why they had to transport what would later be used to build the Mishkan walls. Shalom Shadron continues and says, we have to understand that a Jewish home is a Mikdash Me'at. Our homes is like a Mikdash, like a Beit Mikdash. In fact, the whole Mishkan, we taught, is that it was a replica of Sari Imenu's tent. She had the clouds, she had the bread, she had the candles, right? All that the Mishkan was copying. It was copying a Jewish home. And we know that if a man and a woman are zocher, they'll have the Shekhinah with them in their house. And how does that happen? Not through miracles. You have to actually work on it. Right? I brought here the sefer from the biography of Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, the Chassidika Bracha. On page 71, I believe it's page 71, he talks over here about saving shidduchim. There was a rabbi that when people would come to him to check the names, and he would say, don't get married. He even would tell people who are married, you're married the wrong person. You might have to separate and stuff like that. And Mordechai Eliyahu told me, you got to stop. He said, no, I understand names, I understand calculation, I got to tell people. So Mordechai said, really? Sat him down. He said, what's your name? What's your wife's name? And according to his own calculation, this guy, him and his wife should not be married. It's no good. And they have 8 children. This guy started to cry. And Mordechai Eliyahu told him, you don't look at names. If you want a marriage to work, both people have to work in it. It doesn't come through miracles. Oh, our names match. It's going to be a good marriage. We're going to live, perfect for the rest of our life. Not going to happen. In order to make a marriage last and to make a marriage worthwhile, make a marriage be blissful the way a person wants it, it has to be worked upon, right? And they bring another story or two here, like it's from Mordechai. But that's the idea. The idea is it doesn't come to miracles. We fell head over heel, or heel over head, whatever the expression it is. Our names match, so good. That's not the way it works. It works when a person builds on it. When Rabbi Yecheskel Levenstein Zechasidik Bracha would talk to Hatanim, would talk to the mods, talk to young married men, he would say, a married man has to ask himself, what did I do today to enhance my shalom bayit? That's how a person has to ask himself. Rabbi Elazar Menachem Shach, the Rosh Yeshiva, told the young man, you got to speak to your wife in the manner you speak to me. You got to have as much reference as you talk to a Gadol Ador, and that's not an easy task, I tell you. It's not easy. And the Gadol Ador you don't see every day, so it's easier for you to, when you see him, to talk to him in a respectful manner, very respectful manner, overly respectful manner. At home, your wife's always there, so you kind of people take it for granted. But it's important that we don't, that we understand that in order to have the Shekhinah there, you have to be very careful. Rav Avram Pam, he was very into avoiding mahloket. Once, a young man in the yeshiva came to Rav Pam and said, I'm getting married. I want you to be Mesadeh Kiddushin, to be the one making the whole, officiate the chuppah. At first, Rav Pam said yes, but then when he heard that another Rav was going to be there from the family, he said, I think that Rav should do it. I don't want to, take from him his kavod. You should give it to him. He said, Rebbe, but I want you also to be there and do something. So Rav Pam said, just give me the bracha of Sameach Tisamach Re'im Ahuvim. Gladden intensely the companions who are beloved. It's a bracha of being happy with one another. That's the bracha that I want to have. I want to be happy with everybody. Right? Once this young man came to visit Rav Pam in his house on the Motzei Shabbat with his wife. And Rav Pam invited him in and said, listen, just sit here for shortly. I'm going to finish washing the dishes and I'll come and speak to you. Rav Pam washing dishes? Rosh Yeshiva, Terumah, huge rabbi. He was the Chavetz Chaim of his time. Shalom Bayit. Personally, I don't understand. Obviously, Rav Pam probably wasn't washing the dishes every night or every week. His wife needed help. And so he helped. Rabbi Eliezer Dessler tells us, for newlyweds, for people who are married, as long as your desire is to give to one another, as long as you want to give to your wife and the wife wants to give to the husband, both of you will receive from each other and both of you will be happy. But the moment that your desire is to take rather than to give, neither of you will receive, and God forbid both of you will be unhappy. What it means is you have to work on your marriage. You have to work on Shalom Bayit. You have to continue work. It doesn't happen miraculous. It doesn't happen anything. And you have to make such a way to continuously work on it. That's why you have to use the beams, physical beams. Not that Hashem's going to say, Hashem can send beams, but no, in order to have a Shekhinah there, you have to physically work on it. So Be'ezrat Hashem, these 3 lessons, 3 important life lessons, and these amazing stories that came with them. The lesson, A, of how to give tzedakah, you're giving it for Hashem. You're not giving it for any other reason. You should give for other reasons too. You're feeling bad, but also give back again, as Hashem said. If you give because Hashem said, Hashem will pay you back 1,000,000 times full. Our second lesson was that when it comes to Torah, you never had enough. You can't. Possible. Not impossible. You have parnasah, you're good. And you can also use your parnasah and your shulchan for Hashem, and that has no limit of how much you can do to raise Hashem that way. And our third lesson was that in order to bring the Shekhinah in the Mishkan, in order to bring the Shekhinah in our homes, you have to actually physically do something about that. And so with this, I want to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom.